make a start, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Max Kennedy, the National Manager of Biological Industries at Ministry of Science and Innovation, and it's a great pleasure today to have this discussion on the expansion and export of the food and beverage sector. Now, the information you'll see today came out of a joint project led by MED on gathering together the information about the food and beverage sector. So this is really a summary of where we've got to, and also some new ideas have come up about, where should New Zealand be positioning itself going forward. So Tim Morris, who is with Coriolis, will give the lecture this afternoon, and he said that if we want to ask questions, just bail them up and ask them as we go through. So feel free to interject and stop them if anything too heretical comes out, and I look forward to finding out a lot about the more details in the sector. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Max. Everyone, thank you all for coming. I'm going to jump through a lot of material today. We've done a huge amount of work over the past year. It's been at least a year on this project. First, I'd like to thank all of our sponsors. It's a bit of a who's who of organizations that have disappeared, being longer than other ones. But when the project started, we had MED, MSI, MFAT, MAF, NZT, Ministry of Fisheries, and the Department of Labor all on board, which I think is one of the first times that many agencies have put together in for something. So it's an attempt to have a whole of government approach to this, or at least that's just say the importance of government. I'd like to thank all those agencies, obviously, for sponsoring. I'd also like to thank Andrew McCullum, who's here, who's shepherded us on our way and helped edit some of our business speak into Wellington speak, which has been a great help. I'm going to talk very quickly. It's a personal failing of mine. I do talk quite quickly, and I've got a lot of material I want to get through. Please do put your hand up and ask questions. My wife, God bless her, says that when I talk and present material, I'm quite dry, and when I answer questions, I seem quite witty and funny. So if you could ask questions, I would look good on the YouTube. We'll jump into it.
Well, you look great. I said you look great.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to jump through. I'm just going to jump through huge amounts of this. What we've got here is a document that makes the investment case for New Zealand. So food industry specifically. There's a lot of myths about New Zealand. I was actually born in New Zealand, Lincoln, where my father was teaching. There's a lot of myths about New Zealand. Sometimes as an outsider who grew up in the US and comes back to New Zealand and looks at it, you can see things a little bit more clearly. But what this document is doing, the original aim of the whole project was to gather together the information. And at the beginning of the project, we noticed, well, actually there's a national government in power, we're all about business. So we came from an investor's point of view. Now, that investor is unidentified. That could be your own personal investment, that could be an overseas investor, that could be a high net wealth individual, could be a corporation. Fonterra invests all the time. And it's focusing on maybe making the positive story about New Zealand. Then we'll talk about the complete food and beverage information project. Then we'll jump into where growth might be coming from in the future. Now I'm going to go through these very quickly. New Zealand is a developed, temperate climate country in the Asia-Pacific region. That's this, but any of these indexes you go and you look at, we're doing some work right now for AT, Auckland Tourism. On growth, any of the indexes you look at out there in the world, New Zealand usually ranks in the top 3 or 4. If it was as easy as winning some of these indexes, economic freedom or investor protection, we would be up there with Switzerland in terms of wealth. New Zealand is a mid-sized country, similar in size to Italy and the United Kingdom, small population. And another way to put this, and we put it something else, was that New Zealand's the size of Italy with the population of Singapore. As a result, it produces more food than it consumes and exports the surplus. So we've got similar size to Italy or the UK. Coastline, we've got more than China. Significant amount of coastline, but a relatively small population. And this counters some of those myths that you hear. We hear the story. New Zealand's a tiny country at the end of the planet. Well, we're not. Italy's quite a large country, actually. Come to think about it. Italy, interestingly though, produces. Feeds 60 million people at home and exports 2 or 3 times as much food as us. Food and beverage exports are important to New Zealand, and the country is a major food and beverage exporter. So food and beverage, out of all of our exports, merchandise exports, and we export about them as much as Denmark, less than the UK, certainly less than Italy, Germany, France, and a number of other countries. New Zealand's food and beverage exports are growing strongly, and the country's relative performance is improving. So when we look at 1965 through 1980, New Zealand was relatively far down in the three peer group here countries, relatively far down in the rankings. 80 through 95 we moved up, 95 to 2010 we moved up further. Now it's interesting the countries that are still ahead of us, some of them paint a picture of where we need to go. Take a country like Switzerland, it always beats us, it's always had better growth than us. You know, can you think of a worse place to invest in food, to produce food?
Denominated this.
These are all actually in non-inflation adjusted US dollars, and that's the compound annual growth rate in export dollars over the period. But if we look at Switzerland, I can't imagine a worse place to produce. It's high cost, it's expensive labor, it's expensive land. It has to import a lot of the food it produces, and you know, yet it is a very successful producer. But it indicates the importance of you know, driving growth through value-added foods rather than ingredients.
Does that include all commodities, or is it just the value-added stuff?
This is all. This is everything. So this is we're using the HS codes to drive it, the harmonized trade codes. It's HS2 through HS22, plus or minus a couple of minor ones. Food and beverage manufacturing around the world. We've done well. I mean, this is sort of your the who's who of who's invested in the New Zealand food industry. This is a really positive story. Most of the major food companies in the world have invested in New Zealand. I don't think we always realize how many of them have, because a lot of them sort of sit quietly and do their thing. This isn't companies that have sales offices in New Zealand. This is companies that manufacture food in New Zealand. All these companies have some form of manufacturing plant that have invested in it.
And are currently invested.
Are currently invested, yes.
Come and gone. Those are people.
Those are there here today, right now. All those companies there, yes. New Zealand sectors, while all are achieving export value growth, processed foods and beverages stand out as the growth stars. So if we deconstruct that 54% of our exports, which is food, 50% is dairy, broken out across these groups, 22% is meat, seafood and aquaculture in there, all of our fruits and veg, all of our other foods in there, processed foods, wine and other beverages. And if we look at growth over here, so this is again, non-inflation adjusted US dollars, 1995 to 2010, we see where the growth is being driven out of. Overall 7% coming out of beverages, wine industry driving that, other beverages also doing well, and processed foods are the big drivers of growth in that. Within food and beverages, a number of subsectors are emerging as areas of growth potential. Those are infant formula, frozen meals and sides, is later in the thing we talked about emerging growth sectors. All of those, quite interestingly, are built on fundamental comparative advantage of New Zealand. To take an extreme example, spirits exports are growing because that's built on whey alcohol. So from whey we can make very pure alcohol, which is then leading to things like 42. In most cases, global country. Taking frozen meals and sides. The three largest frozen meals and sides producers in the world manufacture in New Zealand. Producers McCain, Simplot, and Heinz. The three largest producers in the world, they've endorsed New Zealand. Pet food. The three largest producers of pet food in the world produce in New Zealand. Three of the top 5 US wine companies have invested in New Zealand. Three of the top 5 Australian wine companies have invested in New Zealand. Three of the top 4 Japanese beverage companies have invested in New Zealand. Three of the largest alcohol beverage firms in Europe have invested in New Zealand. The second largest confectionery producer in the world is in New Zealand, as is Mars, although they don't produce confectionery here. Two largest producers of infant formula in the world manufacture in New Zealand. So, you know, these global major multinationals look at a global portfolio. They've got the countries of the world to choose from, and they're choosing New Zealand for investment and reinvestment. We've seen that more recently with some of the decisions like Heinz, which moved production to New Zealand. New Zealand exports food and beverages to a wide range of destinations. Asia is now the largest destination, taking 40%. China is the single largest destination, and Asian countries are 10 of the top 25 destinations. So this is where we send our food and who our markets are. And I think, as I said somewhere else, if you were to stop the average person on the street in New Zealand, and you were to say to them, New Zealand, we produce a lot of food, yes we do, and where does it go? I think you would still get some version of this, the old narrative of we produce food for England, and yet under Europe, if you deconstruct that, it's only 5% to the UK nowadays, and you know, huge parts of the world take a lot more, and the growth parts of the world. New Zealand is in the middle of a fundamental transition from feeding Westerners to feeding the Asia-Pacific region. So this is 1965 to 2010, percent of food exports by region. what you're seeing in this, the decline of Europe, the growth and then stabilization to decline in North America, the growth of Australia and Oceania, and then really the growth of East Asia, Southeast Asia, and North Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, sort of the Muslim world, if you will. Growth is being driven by the Asia-Pacific region and other markets of the future. I love these matrices. They're sometimes a little bit complex. That's 10-year absolute value growth. That's 10-year compound annual growth rate. And the size of the bubble is the absolute export value. So we see East Asia, a huge driver of growth out here. Australia, Southeast Asia, North Africa, and then South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, also small but growing quickly. New Zealand has free trade agreements either in place or proposed with most of the Asia-Pacific region. So with the way MFAT, et cetera, have been driving the trade deals, we've got a very good picture with the Pacific Rim, which luckily is our market of the future. New Zealand food and beverage industry has attracted investment from a wide range of sources. 25% of the investment in New Zealand food and beverage industry is from outside of the country. Now, what we've used to mock that up is the turnover of the top 64 New Zealand food and beverage firms by ownership. And again, this is another example of somewhere where if you were to purely believe what you might read in the business section of the Herald or what you might hear on the radio, you would think that the Chinese or Asians were buying up the country. China owns 0%, so it's under 0.5% within rounding of our food industry. Iwi own 1, listed firms are only 1, charities own more than China. Private individuals or private organizations own 14%, farmers own 59%. The Anglo-Saxon world, the Anglosphere, owns 14%, Europe is 3%, and Asia is 8%. So a different story, I think, than you get in the media, certainly. That can change quite quickly. We've just been doing work on Australia, and the rate at which Asian, particularly Asian organizations are taking, for example, their sugar industry. Their sugar industry's gone from 14% foreign-owned 2 years ago to about 80% foreign-owned this year. We were looking companies up, and as we looked them up, they would be taken over. New Zealand has a long history of achieving success in food and beverages due to its supportive ecosystem. I'm not going to go through all of these, only to say for all the economists and everyone else in the room, there is an element of path dependence, there is an element of reinforcing of existing strengths going forward. New Zealand supports scientific research in food and beverage through a strong group of government research agencies. They're the main ones right there. There's also significant food and beverage research conducted across the 4 internationally recognized universities that have a reasonable focus in food, not to say that others don't do stuff, but those are the 4 that stood out as strong in food. The New Zealand government has recently demonstrated its commitment to the industry by creating and funding the New Zealand Food Innovation, a network of 4 food industry R&D pilot plants across New Zealand, Auckland, Waikato, Palmerston North, and South Island. So that's just to stop there for a minute. What I've just run through is our sort of pitch document, if you will. It's the sort of sell document. How do we sell New Zealand to investors? Why should you invest in New Zealand? Putting the positive case forward. It forms one of the structural pieces to the total food and beverage information project. So I wanted to go through that quite quickly. There's the investor's guide. There's also an industry snapshot, which sits parallel to that. Then we've done documents on the dairy sector, document on the meat sector, seafood, produce, processed foods, beverages, and nutraceuticals. There's separate documents, sort of 60 to 100 pages on each of these sectors. Then there's a document on the markets that New Zealand sells to, looking from a market lens. Where's our growth coming from in Southeast Asia? Where's it coming from in the Pacific Islands? So that's the total project. I'm not going to go through all of those documents today. We'd be here all day. They're all available for you to look at on foodandbeverage.gov.nz. You're welcome to look at any and all of them. If you have any questions about any of them, please do call me. I'm going to jump now into the final piece of the project. The caveat around this is it hasn't been released yet. We're in the final stages of that now. Just waiting on the minister's office to do some things.
Just while you're doing that, do you publish hard copies? Can you buy hard copy of the report? There's going to be 14 or 15 documents in total. There are over 1,000 pages. We're just going with digital at this time. Nowadays, most people there's PDF files and they're completely available for download, so you can load it on your tablet or computer or whatever.
Now to sort of jump to the other end of the whole project. So we started out, we looked at all of the sectors in the New Zealand food and beverage industry. Andrew, yes?
We do have some hard copies of the investor's line, but that's all.
Sorry, of which one?
Of the investor's
So
line.
the document I just went through, which is the investor pitch, that's also gone to the NZT offices around the world, and it's been translated into Chinese. So I'm going to jump to the other end of the project now. We got to the end of the project, and there was sort of the question that's been there, and it's been bubbling away for a number of years since the New Zealand Food and Beverage Task Force, which was, we've got our traditional sectors. We've then had this thing, the wine industry sort of emerged from nothing to be a sort of billion-dollar sector. Then the question was, we need some more wine. I mean, the way it was put in one thing was, we need another 3 to 5 wine industries to emerge and blossom and grow. And so really the question in this project was the one we were often getting asked, which is, what is the next wine industry? Now, we're coming at the question from the point of view, I suppose, of private equity. A lot of what our firm does in terms of work is actually for banks, private equity, major corporations, and we're using a screening methodology. So it is, by its very nature, effectively backwards looking. It's looking at the world as it is today. We're trying to screen that and look for opportunities for investment within the New Zealand, the growth areas of New Zealand's food and beverage exports. Let's just jump into it. So what is a screen? And it doesn't really matter how you do it, but you collect a huge number of opportunities up there. You take them through a filter to a second stage. You look at those ones that have come through in more detail, and then finally you come down to your short list. So and it's a methodology I'm sure is used in science. It's used in banking when you're in investment banking, you're looking at acquiring someone. Corporations would use it when they would say, what is a new business we can get to that's got opportunities for growth? We've applied it to New Zealand's food and beverage exports. So the 3 stages. Stage 1 was the preliminary screen. So we developed a pool. I'll just go into what those were. We took all of the trade codes, all of the numbers we do in the Food and Beverage Information Project are in US dollars. I know I paused for that. It does 2 things. It allows us to compare New Zealand with other countries quite easily, to say, well, what are our exports relative to Denmark, relative to Ireland. Secondarily, it removes the issue of exchange rates. So whenever you're looking at any industry, if the exchange rate's going one way, they want to blame the exchange rate, and if it's going the other way, they want to take credit. So by using US dollars, we neutralize that. So we took all of New Zealand's food and beverage trade codes at the HS6 level. Trade codes go out to 10 digits. We stopped at the HS6 level. There were 559, of which 38 had over $100 million in exports. That's our core current exports. The focus of this project was in the 129 that were between 2 and 99 million US, and then there were 392 less than 2 million. We then took those out into a pie. So all of our ones over 100 million are existing core, milk powder, frozen beef, etc. Are 84% of our exports. The ones between 2 and 99 in aggregate, all 129 of them, are about 16%, and everything less than 2 million was less than 1%.
Did you look at the substitution between them? So, for example, milk would go into a huge number of different products when you were working on the expansion.
For the purposes of this, we grouped some, which I'll come to in a minute, but effectively we were just treating the trade code as it was. Now, there's issues with that at the edge, but we sort of took it at what it was. If it's exported as milk powder, and then it starts being exported as infant formula, well, then infant formula goes up and milk powder doesn't go as much, and that's the best we could do with what we had. The 38 trade codes with exports over US 100 million, each have been excluded from the analysis. They represent New Zealand's core food and beverage exports. What are they? Milk and cream in a solid form, aka milk powder, unboned meat or sheep, frozen bovine meat, milk and cream in a solid form, skim milk powder, butter, kiwi fruit, wine, cheese, not elsewhere specified, other milk fats, products containing natural milk constituents, frozen bone meat of sheep, infant formula, fresh apples, grated cheeses, fresh and boneless bovine meat, as in cows, meat of sheep, that's infant formula again, frozen fish, rock lobster, edible offal, cheese, frozen fish, milk, mussels, buttermilk, and fats of bovine animals. So that's our core of what we export. When we talk about commodities, that's what me, I prefer to think of a lot of these things, many of them as ingredients, because they often go milk powder. No one buys milk powder, they buy something milk powder gets made into. So what we've then done here is a sort of bar chart by category. And what you can see in that is that the
ones that we're looking at, this is the ones that should be 38, not 28, over 100 million. There's then 128 here. There's then the huge tail, the long tail, less than 2 million, 392. What's in this one? Because we're not going to talk about those either. Potential future growth stars, so things that are growing off a very small base. Fish liver oil, blue vein cheese, spelt, mustard seeds, potato starch, dried apples, and seaweeds. Re-exports, things not produced in New Zealand. Cashew nuts, unroasted coffee, ginger, pineapples, saffron, papaya, turmeric as examples. Failures to date, shrinking or no meaningful growth. Fresh grapes, yogurt, fresh melons, olive oil, asparagus, plums, and turkeys, just being examples of things that aren't growing as it stands. So then we take the 129, we ran those through a qualitative screen, which I'll touch on in a minute, and we took out 25 candidates, which went to stage 2. What did we do in the screen? Now look, we were obviously captured by the data we were using. We were using trade data. There's certain amounts of information. And when we discussed this with our steering group, there were some very sensible questions from some very sensible people in the room with a business background. Questions about profitability, questions about future growth, questions about major players globally. We had what we could work with, which was trade data. So what did we look at? We looked at absolute value growth over a 5 and a 10-year period. We color-coded those. When you see some of the stuff, green, good, red, bad. Compound annual growth rate of exports, 10 years and 5 years. Dollars per unit in 2010, and then a compound annual growth rate of dollars per unit. And then we give it an overall attractiveness with a scoring here, high, medium, and low. So we went through this. It was purely a mechanical screen. We didn't try to second guess the results that came out of it. There were some obvious ones that came out. And we thought, is there really a future in that? Probably not. But we took them through stage 2. So what were they? 25 high potential emerging growth opportunities were identified. Salmon, frozen cuts of chicken. Now that would be a classic example of one that came through as an opportunity, but we knew from other work we've done on Teagle that there probably wasn't a huge, that wasn't going to grow to be $1 billion. But it came through, we dealt with it. Honey, fresh onions, capsicums, frozen and dried peas, avocados, cherries, berries, bovine meat prepared and preserved, prepared fish, beaten cane sugar, another one that we had questions about, sugar confectionery, chocolate. A lot of chocolate has more dairy in it than it does cocoa beans. Biscuits, frozen French fries, shelled beans, jams and jellies, other fruit juices, shoots and broths, water unsweetened, aka bottled water, beer, alcoholic cider, spirits, and pet food. So those were the ones that came through from the screen purely mechanically. We didn't try to pick them or second guess them. We then took those through a second screen. Interestingly, there were some ones that we wanted to highlight that just missed the cut. So these were the ones that almost made it into the screen, but didn't. Soft drinks, protein concentrates, and textured protein substances. I'm still not sure what that is, and I've asked. Mixtures of fruit prepared or preserved, breakfast cereals, other pastas not elsewhere specified. That's Heinz spaghetti in a can. Sausages and similar, mollusks and other aquatic invertebrates, and bird's eggs and shell. So those are the ones that came through that were quite interesting but didn't quite make the screen.
So just hold on Freecore.
Sorry?
Freecore, how did, just go back to that slide. Freecore turnover of 500 million.
Which one?
Freecore.
We make the mixed fruit.
Soft drinks.
Yeah,
And it's
most of that goes to-
Frucor with V and then
and
Charlie's.
250 million exports to Australia. So I'm just trying to rationalise what you've got.
It's probably the HS6 codes, how it's captured in those, because can't remember. You can look on the stats web page, and some of those are very strangely linked. Like on the cheese slide, it was cheese NES, which is basically cheese that doesn't capture anywhere else.
The challenge with trade codes is that the Americans and the Europeans put them together to classify their own products, and we just have to adopt them. And it doesn't. So Edam cheese isn't because it's not cheddar, so it's cheese out there. But soft drinks there. I mean, it's a good category. It wasn't growing as fast as some of the other ones, and in many of these cases, you were looking at them. There were many cases it was a single firm driving it. So Frucor driving soft drinks with V as an example.
So that's 1,800 people working in Wiri, 500 million turnover, growing flat out. Just everybody knows. That's Fresh Up. That's the old Fresh Up guys.
Yeah.
And ballistic. Real interesting.
It's probably not that HS6 code though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now owned by Suntory.
Because some of it is probably fruit juices versus soft
Fizzy
drinks.
drinks.
So that's why it doesn't.
Moving into the secondary screen, we created a 2-page scorecard to look at them. I'm not going to take you through. I'll take you through how we thought about it. So the one page was going to be purely quantitative. One page was going to be qualitative. And then the questions we tried to answer by the numbers were, where are the major global markets? Who are the major exporting countries? Who are the key firms in New Zealand? And where do New Zealand's exports go? So on the quantitative page, those were the main questions we were trying to answer. Then on the qualitative page, we said, what is the structure of the global market? How's the New Zealand market structured? What does New Zealand have to work with? And what are the challenges facing the sector? And then from that, we use that to drive the second stage of the screen. And all of these screens and all of the data we use to make all of our decisions is appendicized. I'll give you a quick look at that, but we won't go through it in detail because there's obviously an infinite amount of detail there. Part of how we thought about that screen and how we came to it is the New Zealand wine industry. And when you look at New Zealand's wine exports, the New Zealand wine industry emerged from nothing around the late 80s to the early 90s to become one of the country's largest exports. Conceptually, this project's looking for the next wine industry. You go back in time, we had no wine exports. 1960, it was 5 pounds. 5 pounds worth of wine exports. And so the question we started asking ourselves was, if someone had said in circa 1970, the New Zealand wine industry is going to grow to be $1 billion industry, it's going to take on the best of France in the UK, we're going to get more per litre for our wine into Europe in aggregate than the French will get, people would have laughed at you. They said, we make crap wine, it's all the Turgo, it's, there's no opportunity in it. And yet this happened. And so, I don't think we can predict the
From what
future.
we've seen so far, obviously soft drinks is the huge opportunity. If Coca-Cola can do it, we have a pretty good image for clean water in New Zealand. That, there must be an opportunity in that.
For wine, for beverages.
No, for beverages, I'm talking soft drinks.
Yeah.
It's got to be a good opportunity in soft drinks.
We've done a lot of work globally on soft drinks. Soft drinks didn't make it into our final screen for some very well and understood reasons. I'm happy to discuss those. Very little, the issue with soft drinks in the global trade data, very little of soft drinks crosses borders. And most of the global growth and trade going on right now in soft drinks is driven by one product, which is Red Bull. So when we look at the global trade data, soft drink trade is expanding, what we're saying is Red Bull is doing really well. And so most soft drinks are a duopoly. Two firms produce it, Coca-Cola and Pepsi. They will produce 95% of the soft drinks in any of the major developed markets in the world. They bring in the syrup, they put it into bottles, and they sell it to people. It's a natural duopoly because you've got trucks on the road, and those trucks have to drive around every single convenience store and petrol station and supermarket and deliver huge bulky amounts of product. So New Zealand has very little ability to break into a duopoly with two firms. And it's just a difficult market. So I'm more than happy, I can talk soft drinks for the rest of the day. Soft drinks didn't make the screen. Sorry about that. Bottled water didn't look that flash. The characteristics of the New Zealand wine industry circa 1990 were identified and used to develop the qualitative scorecard. So what we did was think about what was the nature of the New Zealand wine industry circa 1970. What we came up with was there was a large global market, there was strongly growing global demand. We've added in Asian opportunity just because the world's changing. There was a premium for quality. Rich countries do it. And again, this sort of goes against that metaphor of, China, why wouldn't we just make it in China? Everything's going to be done in China tomorrow. We're all doomed. It's not true. Certainly, it's much easier to compete with the Switzerlands and the Belgiums and so on. It's capital intensive. And again, some rich countries do capital intensive. And then in New Zealand, are there a large number of firms? Is there required skills? Can we leverage the country's image? Are we able to differentiate, and do we have trade access? So when we said what it was, it was the qualitative scorecard. That's what we used to judge the categories on this stage too. So what were the results from that when we looked at the screen? I might go to the next one. We sorted those into good, better, and best. Now all of these are good. Let's just be realistic here. We went through all of those trade codes. We came down to a short list. This is the short list. Starting with good, jams and jellies, capsicums, peas, frozen and dried, sugar confectionery, soups and broths, fresh onions, prepared fish and beef jerky. Better, chocolate, frozen French fries, beer, alcoholic cider, avocados and berries. And best, salmon, honey, spirits, biscuits, pet food, and cherries. Now, not all of those have the possibility, we think, to grow to be $1 billion industry, but all of them have possibilities for further growth.
With the French fries, did you include kumara? Is there an opportunity?
That will be in other frozen vegetables, other. So the trade data breaks down at a certain point. We have a problem with one category called food not elsewhere specified, not elsewhere specified other, which was 20, 99, 90, 50. And yet New Zealand had, $150 million worth of exports in this category. And so we were trying to find out what it was. So, then one of the trade-related government agencies said, ask us, we know everything if you have any problems. So we asked them, and they said, and they read us back to what it said, things otherwise not classified elsewhere, which meant they didn't know. So we then called customs and said, look, this going forward, we've got to know what's in this category. And so customs, we had to make all kinds of agreements, gave us an output of 6 months of what was in that category. And it actually represented innovation. It was all of the things that didn't have a trade code. And so it was actually, we thought about it as the innovation category, because the Americans and the Europeans and et cetera hadn't come up with a number for it yet. And so it was all kinds of really interesting stuff. Some of the nutraceuticals, it was party pills, I mean, it was everything. It was a catch-all. So the answer is Coomer in there? No, that's just
Can I, hang on,
please.
milk powder, formulated milk powder isn't there.
Do you mean infant formula?
Infant formula?
Infant formula is over 100 million when we aggregate the categories together, so it didn't get done. This is only 2 million to 99 million in exports. We're already over the hump with infant formula.
Yes.
It's already big and growing.
It depends, you can have so many different kinds of milk powder, yeah, okay.
In aggregate, the 20 identified categories, so the ones on the previous page, have larger exports than the wine industry, and most of these categories are growing faster than all other food and beverage exports. So overall, all other food and beverage exports, the blue on the pie, is growing at 8%. Wine are still continuing to be our star over this period, growing at 18%. And then our other sectors are all showing a range of growth. Alcohol, cider, huge growth, range of growth underneath that. But in aggregate, these are bigger than the wine industry and doing well.
In that, did you look at which markets were growing?
Do you mean in terms of which global markets were growing? Abstracted from product or product linked?
Either or. I remember doing some work on trade and onions. We export like huge amounts of that to Australia and only Australia.
Yeah, we looked at both. So in the overall information project, there's a document called Markets, and that purely came from a market lens. It said, is Southeast Asia importing more food than East Asia, and compared all the regions purely on a food level. Then for each of these, when we did the stage 2 screen, which I'll go through one of those in detail in a minute, we looked at the global markets and where New Zealand was exporting it to and what rate those markets were growing at. So we'll come to that in a second. Most 17, it's actually 18 to 20 now, of the identified growth segments have already attracted foreign and/or private equity investment, indicating we're not alone in thinking they present strong growth opportunities. Now, what I've just gone through there, what I've just done, banks do all the time, private equity houses do all the time, major multinationals do that all the time. They're saying, where can we get some growth? We want to get growth, we want to grow for our shareholders, etc. When we went and looked at all of these categories that we'd identified after the fact, what we found was there's been global investment in them, either by banks or by multinationals are present in there. Now, there is an obvious chicken and the egg problem there. Maybe the multinational invested and then it got growth, or maybe it got growth and then the multinational invested. From our research and from what we know most of the firms on this page, it's a combination of both. It's not either or, it's a both. New Zealand's frozen French fry exports were growing, and then Simplot bought Mr. Chips. It drove the growth even harder. In honey, just to take an investment in that, Waterhouse Capital bought Manuka Health, Manuka Health. Australia, interestingly, some other sort of big picture stage 2 conclusions. Australia plays a major role for many of the identified categories. Categories range in their exposure to competition from imports. So when we look at Australia as a percent of the value, 96% of our cider exports go into Australia, all the way down to cherries, only 2%. So varying, but Australia is an important market, sort of nursery, particularly for the more of the processed goods, processed products. And then looking at imports versus exports, in some instances, chocolate as an example, we import a lot more than we export. In other cases, we import very little because we've got phytosanitary barriers and export a lot. And many of these ones, Australia is often the only country allowed in. So then moving on to stage 3, so we did this whole thing, we came up with the identified shortlist, and then we went away and developed stories about each of those. So here is the best and the better. What we've done so far is we've evaluated salmon, there's a separate salmon document. We've evaluated honey, there's a separate honey report. And we've evaluated spirits, that's just spirits. You only notice those things when you see them in big screen, don't you? Luckily, it hasn't been published yet. We've done those three. The other ones are obvious opportunities for more. And then of the three that we looked at and analyzed in detail, honey and spirits stand out as presenting the best investment opportunities. So from an investor's point of view, questions we asked were, are there clear opportunities for constant and ongoing long-term growth going forward? Spirits, definitely. Honey, mixed. Salmon, we've got questions. What are their opportunities for? Small investors, mid-sized investors, large investors, and global firms. What you find in the spirits industry, because of its nature and where it is in the growth cycle, there's more opportunity for smaller investors than larger ones. Not that global firms haven't really stepped in New Zealand. Honey, bit of a mix, more of in the middle. And then salmon, it's really only the game for global firms at this point. And then government, can government help or is it the problem? And not to pick on those in the room. Salmon is really the one that stands out there. And it's not government, it's the national consensus. We don't have a consensus yet on whether or not we want to do a lot of salmon farming. So there's no one-size-fits-all opportunity. The different categories are different points in their life cycle. So spirits is in the early stage, honey is in the growth phase, salmon is in the more mature phase. So the bit that I wanted to touch on, that was the results of the quantitative screen, that was the results of the qualitative screen, which is what then drove the good, better, best decision. These are the 2 pages. I just want to talk through one of the 2-page ones. Maybe we'll talk about, anyone got a preference? When we look at the beer category, quantitatively, this was the global market. So these were the major importing countries. So the largest importer of beer in the world is the United States. They import 37% of all the beer in the world, $7 billion. Their beer imports are growing at 2% a year. The 5-year absolute growth, these are all in US dollars, is $400 million. And they pay on average $1.18 a kilo or a liter. The major exporting countries, the largest exporter of beer in the world is Mexico, followed by the Netherlands, followed by Germany, Belgium, the UK, the US, etc. In New Zealand, there are 15 hops growers nowadays. Planted hops area is 370 hectares. We produce 830 tons of hops. There are 1,540 people employed in beer production in New Zealand, 51 enterprise units. The key firms in New Zealand in the beer industry are Lion, DB, Harrington's, McCashin, Moa, other smaller niche producers, Emerson's, Epic, Green Man, Founders, Renaissance, Pink Elephant, and many other smaller sized ones. Where do New Zealand's exports go? So our exports primarily go to Australia, 70%, the US 16%, the Cook Islands 4%, American Samoa 3%, the UK 2%, other 5%. Our total exports are 26 million versus a world market of 10 billion. What's the 5-year compound annual growth rate? Not looking too flash in the UK and the US, strong growth in Australia and American Samoa off a very small base. What are our imports? We import 39 billion versus exporting 26. So that's the quantitative screen that we used. We tried to sum all of that up in this number here, which is somewhat subjective. Many of these sectors we've done a lot of work in it. And this one says, what is the possible size of the prize? We sort of had to force ourselves to make a decision. We said 100 million. So we're currently exporting 26. Where can we get to within some reasonable 5 to 10 year time frame? 100 million would be doable, we thought. So if you look at the world market, what does that mean? We export as much as Sweden. So they export 100 million. So that's how we thought about it quantitatively. We forced ourselves to do that. That's open to challenge. We're happy to discuss it with anyone that's got a different opinion. We forced ourselves to do it. Moving to the qualitative screen, we went down this list of things that we said that, remember we said the wine industry had in 1970. We rated New Zealand on those: full circle good, empty circle bad. What's the market structure? Most beer is produced and consumed in the country of origin, relatively little crosses borders. The global beer industry is relatively consolidated. In developed world, most produce global brands in multiple markets. Beer exporters are independent, non-global firms tied to specific countries. So the people who export are not one of those global firms. Grupo Modelo, who export Corona, Mexico, Roma being the largest beer exporter in the world, is not tied into any of the global firms. Craft boutique beers emerging in the UK in the 70s, the US in the 80s, rapidly spread. It's now thousands globally. New Zealand, I'm not going to read through those, that's the New Zealand situation. What are the leverageable existing New Zealand factors? What are the potential sources of value creation? What are the challenges and limitations? And what's the potential role for government in those? And in many of these cases, there's not a lot of role for government. Market forces are doing what they're going to do. Entrepreneurs are doing what they're going to do, driving growth. So there's 2 pages that I've just taken you through on beer. We did that for all of the 25 candidates that came through stage 2. This then justifies our point of view, which gave us the good, better, best ranking. And just while I'm here, Stage 1, just to jump back to it, this shows how we did the quantitative and all of the data that was used in the quantitative piece that got us to Stage 2. So the reason that frozen fish livers and roes didn't make it through is it's only 6 million, it's shrinking over 10 years, it's shrinking over 5 years, it's going down in absolute volume and value, it's not worth that much per unit, and the value per unit's not growing. So just to pick one example out of that, that's why it didn't make it through to Stage 2. And then obviously the more green, the more likely it was to be passed through. So if we take beer, which just came through, here's the beer numbers there, a lot of green showed why it came through to the second stage. And as I said, we developed three segments so far in detail. Those are honey, alcoholic spirits, and salmon. And we really took the sector and went deep in the sector and said what's going on with it. I brought alcoholic spirits up only because there's a chart here that I want to talk to quickly. This one here. Spirits are one of 3 types of alcoholic beverages. So beer, what's it made from? Typical percent alcohol. What is it? What is its origin? What are the examples? Wine and spirits. So the one I want is this one. Beer, the global market is lots of liquid. 188 billion global sales, so that's not trade, that's global sales. That's a $188 billion category. There are several dominant multinationals, many thousands of small producers. The share of the top 10 firms globally on the whole planet, 61%. What are the key global firms? Anheuser-Busch, InBev out of Brazil, Heineken FEMSA, which is Dutch, Stab Miller, which is now South African, now British, Carlsberg out of Denmark, China Resources, etc. So when we looked at that industry, it's a difficult industry to get in. Consolidated industries globally are very difficult industries for a new country to break in, or new producers to break into. When we looked at the wine industry, even today now, after all this consolidation we're talking about, the top 10 firms globally in the wine industry are only 13%. So there's a huge rump, and that would be one of the things we would argue has been driving the success of New Zealand in wine. It is welcoming to small producers. Moving on to spirits, somewhere in between the two. So it's 26% of global spirit production is in the hands of the top 10 firms, which are listed here. But it's still huge opportunities for smaller producers globally. So I think that answers your question there. Just give me 10 minutes, I'll put very long questions. I'm going to run very quickly through the honey piece, just to talk through, to give you a feel. I'm not going to take you through the detail, but just give you a feel for what the level of analysis we went through. Honey has had very strong export growth. What we're seeing is the growth of the industry is being driven by exports. So the dark blue is exports, the light blue is the size of the domestic market. So effectively, the domestic market for honey isn't going anywhere. It's taking about 6,000 tons. Growth is being driven by exports. What's driving that growth? It's been Manuka honey. There's a long history of honey in New Zealand. It's really this identification of Manuka honey is where the industry takes off. Please.
Is this just like, it's going to be incredibly dopey, but sort of honey in a pot as opposed to some of the stuff they're doing with Manuka?
There's a point at which it will be, we're using the trade code, the honey in a pot trade code, which will catch some elements of some of the value-added ones, but it won't catch cosmetics. So it won't catch honey in cosmetics, so we'll talk about that as an opportunity. The numbers you've been given for that. The success of Manuka honey is driving the growth. There have been huge amounts of scientific research around it. This is the number of papers in PubMed. Antibacterial and wound dressing are the main ones that stand out. A lot of other things have been looked at. And then where's the primary author of them? Interesting, more papers published in the UK than New Zealand, but a range of countries looking at all of that. What's the current state of scientific research? I won't go through that. Secondly, it's a premium product. So this is an export matrix. This is the export volume along this axis. That's the average export price per kg, and the size of the bubble is export value. So what we find in that China is a huge exporter. They run pipes of sugar through captive beehives and get very low quality honey. Argentina has huge amounts of land and major honey research. Most of the other countries of the world are caught in here, and we sit out here on our own. We're getting a lot more per kilo for our honey than anyone else, and that's obviously the Manuka effect. It's a MECO chart, so the width of it is the amount that we export, and that is the realized value FOB. So we get our best money out of Canada, Australia, the US, and Hong Kong. The UK sits in there in the middle at the average, Japan, other sectors. Interestingly, Germany, which is a major honey importer, we're getting a lot less than average in Germany, so that's obviously an opportunity. The Germans quite like honey. We need to sell the Manuka story in Germany. Average honey export value. So if we go back only these 10 years, we only were getting about 2 times as much as China, in line with, is that Spain? In line with what Spain got. Then over the last 10 years, our premium has just shot away. And we're getting significantly more. So this is sort of something happening in real time in the last 10 years. New Zealand's honey.
Does this also include the medicinal?
Yes, it does. It includes anything sent out under. It will not include wound dressings or any of the medicalized, weaponized ones for hospitals. It's only catching honey in bottles and or stuff that's predominantly honey, which is the definition of trade codes.
It's like medicinal honey. It is just honey in a tube.
The firm, I mean, we've only got what people reported it to customs as. So they put something on their form. If they put down that was honey because they wanted to play a game with the trade code, the tariffs at the other end or something, we know it's honey. If they put down medicine, we know it's medicine. This is an example of, this is the total honey range in Sainsbury's in the UK. So the super premium active Manuka honey at the top is both retailer store brands in terms of Sainsbury's brands and its manufacturer's brands. There's premium country-specific, country of origin, specific plant, organic, everyday, and then the price fighter. And that will be going back to that map of where the countries that export. So the price fighter will be coming from Argentina or China, and the other ones will be coming from Europe and or the UK. New Zealand active Manuka honey achieves a large price premium on the shelf. So in Sainsbury's, again, it's 15 times the price of the cheapest honey on the shelf. So if you want to buy a jar of cheap, probably Argentinian or Chinese honey, you're paying $2.91 a kilo. If you want to buy the most expensive honey on the shelf, which is actually a British brand, it's £44 a kilo.
Is it defensible? Can other people plant Manuka trees and get active honey off them?
There have been experiments with planting Manuka trees in other countries, and one of these we talk about the risks. There are some trees in Australia which have the same effect. They have some Manuka there. It's very marginal. I've heard arguments in New Zealand between the carbon credits and marginal hill country. Would you plant active Manuka to get honey off? It probably marginally makes sense. Is someone in another country going to try to get the industry off the ground? I'm not sure. It is definitely, it's more defensible than most other things. The plant comes from New Zealand. It is from New Zealand. We've sold the New Zealand story to the world. It's defensible for the next 10, 20 years. Is it defensible 50 years from now? I don't know, but
Can an overseas apiarist try and follow it? And because with those price premiums, it's an obvious thing to try to do.
Part of the problem is just the sheer cost of establishing Manuka. I've seen estimates in New Zealand of costing $20,000, $30,000 a hectare to get Manuka honey out there because the seed is just so rubbish.
I mean, if you had land that you could plant trees on, I haven't done the numbers, but I just in my head, I'm struggling to see that the minute amount of honey that you would get from each tree that the bees take back to the hive and you get it out. You know, if it's there and it's it's in New Zealand and we're taking it, go for it. But would you plant it when you could plant pine? Would you plant it when you could plant apples or something that would give you much better strawberries? You know, what's your cash per hectare? You know, would be a lot better for strawberries than it would for Manuka.
But I suppose on the other question, because it's part of the succession, is will there be enough of a supply of Manuka to keep the supply of Manuka honey growing, or are we going to reach some kind of limit there?
And you know, that's an open question. I'm not sure. I don't got the answer to that. Maybe that's, coming back to some of the people in this room. Maybe that's the role for government. Is there ability to continue growing the Manuka honey industry for the next 5 years in a standard investor's time frame? If we're advising a private equity client, 5 years, you go for it. It'll be there 5 years from now. 20 years from now, that's a different question.
Tim, is there any issue with passing off? Passing off stuff from China or wherever that's not?
Maybe I'll skip forward to some. I've got a limited amount of time. I'll skip forward to the issues. That is a huge issue. That is and sorry.
I read or heard something the other day about studying into Manuka honey, which had the same or better effect as Manuka.
Yeah, that's still a bit disputed, but yeah, that may or may not be true. There's not a lot of Manuka in I'm sure. The major states, Kawau Island, because of wallaby seed on the trees so that the kind of can get up to a canopy height.
I was just wondering if you figured in the risks around the varroa mite.
It's definitely there as a risk if you've got varroa. I mean, everyone everywhere in the world basically has varroa, so we're on a level pegging with them. As long as we can treat it for the same cost and they can, we've a better ability to treat it because ours is worth more. Why would you bother treating it for standard forest honey when you're not getting that premium? So, and then obviously secondarily there is obviously a risk that we just can't stop varroa. The other side of that is that nothing ever, bees are evolving rapidly and we're helping them do that, and I don't think, that they will develop a natural resistance to grow, or at least to be able to deal with it. So, is it a problem in 5 years? No. Is it a problem in 20 years? Maybe. And maybe that's the question. We're only really looking at an investor's time horizon here. I don't think varroa is treatable and it'll still be treatable in 5 years. 20 years from now.
Excuse me, I realise we're going to run out of time at the moment. I ask this with the hope that you're going to say it's covered elsewhere and you can direct me, but I think what we're highlighting here and what we're asking questions about is jeepers. Look at that price up there compared with what it might cost us to produce. And yet you described before, don't go soft drinks. There are just barriers to entry where in fact the companies that dominate are logistics. They're logistics companies and they just happen to pass syrup down it. And I think of the dairy sector, if I were to put that graph up there, you would get the thing that stands out that is, say, a tin of infant formula selling for, I don't know, 20 times the price of milk.
40 times.
40 times, is it? And yet we have, something as good and as big in New Zealand as the dairy sector, but we can't, as I understand it at the moment, make a buck out of getting through to the retail channel in China.
With what?
Am I right? I think,
infant formula?
Yeah, I don't think New Zealand sells infant formula direct to the consumer in China.
No,
so
we've done for private clients a huge amount of work on infant formula. Can we have this discussion afterwards?
Yeah,
because I've got a lot of point of view on infant formula. Infant formula is an opportunity. There are huge barriers to entry driven by the fact you look at the major global infant formula manufacturers. They have 2 times as many salespeople selling to doctors as they do selling to supermarkets. And that exists for a reason.
And let's talk about that, but I'd still highlight your example about Sainsbury's. I would say that the issue isn't producing the Manuka honey or whatever it is, it's getting to Sainsbury's. And possible.
But it's worked. Hold on. Go to this page here, right? Everything in that box is from New Zealand. So if you look at that, that's everything they have. That's their whole, if you went to Sainsbury's and you looked at their shelf, that's all the products that are on the shelf.
Oh, good. I'm with you.
And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them have New Zealand honey in them.
Okay,
so we're doing better than anyone else. And sorry, this one, that one there.
So we would look at infant formula, and this right-hand side may be blank.
Well, no, if you look at infant formula, probably all of the brands on the shelf in many countries, the milk powder in them came from New Zealand.
I agree. We supply the
infant formula
wasn't.
Yeah. Sorry, just to dwell on infant milk powder, because digging one level down, the really successful and high-value stuff is made in New Zealand. Fonterra manufacture it in China and get much less price margin because of quality issues. And so there's an interesting story about infant milk powder that goes to cut below what you're presenting to us. I mean, that's a huge opportunity for New Zealand.
Well, I'd just lob one more thing into there. We should talk about it after an observation, but it's born of being pretty close to this thing. All of independent manufacturers that have tried to make infant formula in New Zealand and distribute it have lost their day.
I think
the lesson of...
Except the new breed are backed by Westland Dairy, who are doing a very good job.
We've done a reasonable amount of work at infant formula for a number of investors. So, I'm going to jump forward here very quickly because the bit that I want to talk about, this is where it's going, growth around the world. It's not a one market story, it's not a UK story, it's a lot of markets. This is then looking at products on the shelf. So we went around retailers' websites. That's Countdown in New Zealand, Sainsbury's, Tesco, Waitrose, Coles in Australia, Woolworths in Australia, Welcome in Hong Kong, Park and Shop in Hong Kong, Cold Storage in Singapore, and Fair Price in Singapore. And the blue is Manuka honey, dark blue is Manuka honey on the shelf. The light blue is Manuka honey but not active, and the blue is other New Zealand honey. So we're making it work around the world. It's not a one market story. It's not a one retailer story. It's happening in multiple countries, across multiple retailers. It's all working out there in the world. We're taking an example of the UK here and looking at share. And what we see in the share, New Zealand's growing import share. This is percent of honey imports by source country by value. New Zealand, 20% of honey imports by value, not by volume, into the UK now are from New Zealand. China's 21. You see here they knocked the Chinese honey out of Europe for a while. Argentina came back on, the South Americans came back on. China's come back in. There's really two markets. There's the Europeans, the rich Western countries, and then there's the bulk stuff. We're winning. Message is, we are winning. Further opportunities for growth. So this is the total New Zealand honey value mix by country versus the global mix. I'm going to summarize all of that into something. This is dollars per capita. What comes out of it? Germany, the US, and other Europe stand out as big opportunities for further growth. So there are markets where we can spread the message and tell them the story. Further growth. This is honey per capita. And again, the markets with further growth opportunities are huge honey consumers. Germany, Greece, the highest honey consumption in the world. That might be going down, that might be going up. God knows what's going to happen there. It's an extensible platform, and again, this is, I'm sorry to use some business speak to scientists, but you can take honey and do all kinds of things with it. It's sort of some kind of magical flavor that you can just put in things and you sort of start to dilute it down. There's all kinds of things you can use it in, ham, beverages, etc. Where can we go with this thing? We can go into unique flavors, cosmetics, nutraceuticals, natural health products, and medical treatment. Here's some examples of some food with New Zealand honey in them. Here's some examples of some beverages with New Zealand honey in them. Here's some examples of some cosmetics with New Zealand honey in them. Here's some examples of some natural health products with New Zealand honey in them. Here's some examples of some medical products. So, you know, we've been trying to build in New Zealand, as I said, a pharmaceutical industry. We've been trying to get into all these high value things. This is our pathway into it. You know, this has been approved by the FDA. It's in hospitals in the US. You start with a pathway doing one thing, then you add more and more products to that pathway and you build up your business. This is our pathway. One of our pathways into medical and into the future. Big range of investment opportunities, won't belabor those for this group. What are the challenges? I won't read through the SWOT. What are the real challenges? Okay, number one, there's no common definition of active Manuka honey at present. It's just a magic word. All of these honeys, say that they're New Zealand honeys, they say they're active. What does it mean? So who knows? It's just a magic word. And then many of them put numbers on it. So this is active 5, that's active 10. Is this active 10 better or worse than that active 5? Who knows? There's no definition of them. Those are all New Zealand honeys. So, secondly, active Manuka honey is being marketed to consumers under a confusing range, some dubious of certification systems. There's this system, there's the UMF, there's MGO, there's the Molan Gold Standard, there's this one here, which as far as I can tell, these guys probably made up.
That's how Bridgecorp got through the screen. That's how Bridgecorp got through the screen. They just bought their rating.
The honey industry has an ongoing problem with fake, mislabeled, and counterfeit Manuka honey. Particularly the label of non-active honey is active. There's a real problem out there, and we're going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg on this one if we're not careful. Moving on to risks. New Zealand government does not protect New Zealand Manuka honey, and just to contrast that, for example, with the UK government's protection of Scottish whisky. It's defined under law, a specific product formulation and production method. There's a prevention of misleading labeling, packaging and bottling requirements, advertising requirements, and specifically protection for whiskey. We do none of those things in New Zealand for Manuka honey. I'm not telling the government what to do. I'm not suggesting where it goes. I would suggest, however, that this industry has been around for 300 years, and this one's been around for, give or take, 10 to 20. The future probably looks more like that. Second issue, retail is becoming challenging. Honey markets at retail are typically structured as a market dominated by a strong number 1 and number 2 brand, and the retailer's own brand. So if we look at Coles in Australia, the number 1 brand, 54%, the number 2 brand, 23%, all others in here, and store brand is there. Similar thing in most markets, interestingly not New Zealand. The success of Manuka in the UK has triggered leading honey firms in those countries to launch Manuka products that are winning the battle for shelf space. So Rouse is the number 1 honey company in the UK. They call up New Zealand suppliers who supply them with Manuka honey. They put it out there. Interestingly, this is not UMF 15, that's just their 15 active. And they put it in their own products. So we're in very danger in this instance of, like a lot of our other industries, becoming a captive supplier of ingredients to others who add value rather than selling our own value. I saw you looking at your watch. Second, the success of Manuka in the UK has triggered Sainsbury's and mid-upmarket supermarket to launch a range of store brands. When store brands start to get in, they're going to get some price destruction. Thirdly, competitors are emerging. Australia's come in, they've got their own, they've got active jelly bush, not nearly as good a name as Manuka, push that one, and then they've got unique the spermum factor, not a good name either, but they're out there trying to push that. They say theirs is even more powerful than ours, and so now theirs is 24. Success breeds imitation. Chilean producers have launched active honey based on honey from the Olmo tree. And again, they've got this sort of 15 to 20 score. Who knows what it means? Doesn't mean anything. And then finally, in New Zealand, a number of firms have launched a range of non-Manuka honeys with rankings, similar to those used in active Manuka. This is looking to lead to confusion for the consumer. You know, this one here, this is a 10 plus factor. I'm not sure what that 10 plus is for, but it's beech forest honey. So I'm going to stop there. So I just want to touch on some of the issues in the industry.
Great. Thanks very much. I think we've got time for some questions. One of the ones I'd like to lead off with is the success of Manuka honey was very clearly demonstrable around Peter Molin's early work, which defined and had science behind it. When you look at the other one, you know, look at your data, does this imply that, for example, we should put a lot more R&D effort into spirits, which has no R&D behind it? The other thing that when I look at your data, the actual growth in the Manuka honey industry is related to health benefits, not so much to its food and nutritive. So should we be looking at health benefits as a strategy? And if health benefits are a good strategy for our food products, why is the nutraceutical industry growing gangbusters? So can you deal with those two, which is, on one side, should we be putting backfilling R&D to these industries? Will that make a big difference like Manuka? And secondly, around if it's health benefits, what's happening to nutraceuticals?
We tried to come purely from a business point of view in this, rather than coming from trying to having out policy advice for anyone. I think if you look at the history of a lot of food products in New Zealand, oftentimes an industry will get off the ground. The dairy industry got off the ground without any government assistance in New Zealand. Settlers brought cows and made milk and started exporting cheese and things. Then the government got involved and assisted the industry in growing. And so I think I understand the value of pure scientific research. I also understand the value of scientific research backing existing successful industries. I think you need a mixture of both. Maybe some more. All other things being equal, I would suggest that more amplification of where we are winning to help that industry. If an industry is growing at 20% a year, maybe some science can help grow 25% a year. I don't think we can pick winners and losers in an industry, but we can amplify. That's probably the best we can do.
The second question is why, if Manuka honey has been so successful, why isn't the nutraceutical industry growing rapidly? Because they're basically targeting the same attributes.
Well, we considered large parts of honey a nutraceutical when we did one of our reports is on the nutraceutical industry. I've sort of got a love-hate relationship with nutraceuticals. Sometimes I look at it and I see a lot of the opportunities. Sometimes I see a lot of snake oil. I think honey amplified an existing belief. There was this existing belief that honey was healthy, it was natural, and then it broke into the UK market. Now remember the reason it initially broke into the UK market was there were a lot of New Zealanders living there who started buying it, but we got on a positive cycle with it. Whereas if you take something else, pine bark extract or totara extract in New Zealand, it may be a great product, it may be complete snake oil, I have no idea.
That's something Ritsina wine. Ritsina wine.
Which one's that?
Well, it's made out of pine bark. Give me some time.
Something.
Horrible.
Marketing is about sometimes things. Why did Red Bull succeed? Why did Red Bull succeed and all of the other energy drinks that were around at the time didn't Lucozade didn't go global? There's some element of random chance. There's some element of time and timing. Once something gets going, then it's succeeding and it's on a roll. And so maybe if we ran the universe backwards and we ran it again, maybe we would talk about the total industry, not the honey industry. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. Yep. I know we're winning in honey, and the government could probably do more to help the industry, but the industry is going to succeed whether or not.
Well, what made Coca-Cola the #1 brand globally in soft drinks?
Because they were the first, and it was initially addictive. Other questions?
Any other questions?
No, but the question isn't answered. It's the multidisciplinary approach. Multidisciplinary being from so many different angles, it was compulsive.
If you look at the history of the soft drink industry, there's about 4 good books on it. At the time, there were drugstores all through the U.S. It emerged in the U.S. and there were drugstores all through the U.S. and there were a large number of Coke-like products. The fountain drinks that you went into the chemist and they made for you. Why did Coke emerge? Because it executed better. There would have been 200-300 firms trying to do what Coke did, and they executed. Why did McDonald's win and Burger Chef lose? Why is McDonald's won and Burger King #2 locally? Because one person executes better at the time, and then that success amplifies itself. There's an element of random luck to it. There's an element of chance. I would
really, it comes down to people with passion. Because why did Red Bull? Was it the leadership?
But sometimes ideas get tested and they don't work at the time. As hypermarkets in the UK market were tested by Tesco in the 70s and they failed abysmally. And then Tesco came back to it in the 90s and it worked. So timing, it's not just, you can have all the passion you want, you may not succeed. You've got to have a combination of product, passion. Just Andrew.
I mean, what you're usually saying in the honey story is the meat industry story, played out again, and really a big part of this is about mergers and acquisitions and ruthlessness around accumulating capital in hunts for us to be able to go and penetrate markets. And what you're showing is a complete shambles of organisation here, and it really comes down to, it's not an R&D question at all, it really comes down to someone with capital with vision, and the wine industry probably succeeded because Peter Hutcher at Montana, had the technical skills and he had the vision and he got the capital. He got science and engineering, a lot of chemical engineering, which gave them the economy of scale to get underway. So I really think these stories are much more about how we organise capital. And New Zealand are reporting on that.
And so at the tail end of the first document showing how we came to our shortlist, we talked about where they were in their growth cycle. Honey is very clearly at that point in this growth cycle, and we say it in this document somewhere that we're going to move into a phase of industry consolidation. All of these little tiny companies are going to merge together, and what they're going to build scale around is probably science and moving into the medical space. They're moving very quickly into medicalized products, and that will give them a defensible scale. You can't have any damn fool honey beekeeper can pour honey into a bottle, but if you're going to make it into an approved product that's going to go into a hospital, that's a barrier to entry.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So I was just going to take you back to the investor document where you had the slide with all the international, multinational sort of investors here. I just wanted to ask you, if we were sitting and having a presentation like this in Australia and Singapore and what have you, would we see the same things? Like, is there an exceptionalism aspect to it? Aren't they all in the same bunch of first world countries, the same usual suspects? So to that extent, what does it tell us other than we have the same qualities or the market seeking? Can we derive?
No, not at all. I mean, we've just done something. We're in the middle of doing something for NZT right now, and we're looking at the Australian, taking the Australian food industry apart and looking at firms. They have a very different profile than us. They make lots of grain. They make lots of sugar. Global multinationals are buying up their sugar industries and their grain industries as we speak. And their profile looks very different. Now, Singapore, I mean, doesn't have any farms. It's tiny, and so they produce more processed foods, infant formula, So, no, it's very country specific. It's not.
But
We've got a very good profile relative to other countries.
You've got to be so careful. We would export a lot more bread to Australia.
A lot more? I'm sorry,
bread. Because if we had more grain, high quality grain, we'd grow high quality grain here. Yeah. Chicken and egg, I mean, you're careful when you look at macro pictures. Take vegetable, for example. The reason we don't export a lot of vegetables to Australia is because they can't get there economically. Mm-hmm. And if you broke that nexus, you'd change the dynamics of the sector.
When we did the screen, we used dollar per kg as one of the indicators because it's very difficult to export things from New Zealand that have a low dollars per kg, all other things being equal, within food. I wouldn't extend that to non-food, but just within food. Sorry, keep going.
White fish, wet fish, you haven't talked about wet fish at all in my analysis. This massive industry.
Fish was a plus 100, so it didn't come through this.
So we've got to be careful interpreting your work in that context. We're not looking at the really big opportunity. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah,
Andrew?
It's important to understand what this piece of work is about. So this piece of work specifically excludes exports over US $100 million. So we're not saying infant formula is what, 700?
200
and something. So we're not saying at all. We're not saying at all that infant formula isn't a big opportunity or anything like that. You're just got to understand what the scope of this work is. This work is only looking at export categories between US 2 million and US 99 million.
And elsewhere, in the Food and Beverage Information Project, the total project, there's a document called Seafood. And in the seafood document, we talk to all of the main seafood companies in New Zealand, and in that, we analyze the seafood industry, which ends up being our big fish. All of our big main fish that we export, lobster, crayfish, obviously come in there as a growth star as well. But we analyze those there. So that's the rest of the other 11 documents look at all of the big bits, milk powder and fish and all of those things. And the role of this piece here is purely to look at what could be the next wine industry. So we have to make some exclusions around that. We talk about fish, we talk about all of the other opportunities in those other documents.
Yep. Any other questions?
People have talked about, well, the recent discussion has been on the scale, the 100 million versus under 100 million. Because this is MSI, is the research needs we have for those different? So you get a 2% win in something like milk powder versus a 2% win in Manuka honey. The simple quantum of money you'll get because milk is so much bigger is very different. And would that be an R&D question that we should look at?
I can't say that any of the companies we've done it for, but we've done similar things for companies. Companies have exactly the same question. If you were, we've never done anything on this specific question for Nestle. So take Nestle as an example. They have a portfolio of products, some of which are big, so your old BCG matrix, your stars and your dogs and your cash cows. And I mean, New Zealand as a country is no different. We've got some things that are, big solid industries. Milk powder, we export a lot of it. And sure, we need to just continue that moving, but it's probably on this velocity. And then we've got the other ones over here that are growing very rapidly. And we've got to keep those growing as well, because our aggregate growth across food is the weighted average of all of those. So it's not an either or question. It's probably, there's no one size fits all in that sense. It's horses for courses. Buzzword I could use is clear.
Would you see a marketing advantage if there were geographical indications? Like champagne is probably, it's a European concept, but applying that to Manuka honey so that it would be a New Zealand origin, and that would give it authenticity and so on, to keep the imitations from other countries, that would add to the premium.
We need to be protecting Manuka honey around the world as a specific name that means something, and we need to be policing that.
That's what
if you look at places like Europe, the number of DOCs there, Domain, Origin, Control A, in Europe, a friend of mine in the dairy industry was in France, and there was one there that was defined in law, and it was 2 women and their herd of cows in the French Alps. And if either the woman died or the herd of cows died, the protection would end. They had their own protection, and if France can protect 2 women and a herd of cows, we should be protecting and play the game against them.
You commented about water. Is the water analysis, are they, surely they're not above 100 million, or are they in this thing and never got through the screen?
Water came through the screen. We were interested in water. It made the 25, but it didn't make the 20. So it went to the stage 2, but it didn't make it through to stage 3. And happy to talk about why that is. We're arriving relatively late to the water game. The water game's been going on for over 100 years. There've been any number of, I used to be a buyer in supermarkets in the US recently. There've been any number of New Zealanders trying to sell water, and people can bring back in, put bladders inside of shipping tankers with petrol and fill them with water and take it to the Saudi Arabia. But any number of schemes, and then if you actually had an honest reckoning of how many water brands have been invented by people in New Zealand over the years, it hasn't worked. It's still not working. It's not generating the results to date.
Well,
it might generate the results tomorrow, but the world's almost turning against bottled water. So that's the challenge. Well, we've got the data there.
Is an Arrowhead run by a New Zealander? Is an Arrowhead run by a New Zealander? It's a US company, but it's run by a New Zealander, I understand.
Possibly. I actually don't know.
So there's a lot of New Zealanders who are doing this, but they're just not doing it for New Zealand, they're doing it for themselves.
Because I would still comment, if we're thinking of investors and this idea of backing winners, commonly what you're going to get is somebody cracks it, and then you get private equity, flowing what seems to be an adequate idea. And if I stand back and I look at, and I think this is what I'm trying to indicate for infant formula, and I look at water, I just stand back and say, for all of the analysis in the world that suggests there's opportunities, I can't see anyone who's made any money out of them. You know, that possibly the single best indicator of getting capital to flow is that someone who's managed to put some risk together has been rewarded for it. And I'll certainly have a look at the water thing.
A number of people have pushed back on various versions of the document. Everyone's got this great water dream and they want water to be in here. Let's just talk really briefly about water.
Well, and again, the test would be who has made any money out of
France,
out of water.
Italy, China, Belgium, that's primarily to Hong Kong. Belgium, the US, Germany. It's primarily France, Italy, as the major rich countries, and that is primarily your Perriers and your main global brands like that. Can we break into this? Maybe. But currently we're exporting $8 million. We are getting good growth out of it, so I'm not to disagree with that. We're exporting 8 into a $2.6 billion market, and there are a number of issues. So it came through to the short list. It didn't make it to the final. I feel like I'm one of those reality TV shows.
So my suggestion is carbonated Manuka water.
Maybe get a bit of salmon in there as well.
A little bit of Manuka on the side.
Okay, we've got probably one last question.
Can you give us the 5-minute version on the infant formula market dynamics and why we're just an ingredient supplier, why we can't earn any brands in there?
No, I'll have a little afterwards. I'll have a little session
That's
on
good.
infant
Okay.
formula.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It'll be a little.
We'll move to the front row.
Come talk to me about infant formula. Anything you want to know, ask me.
Okay, well, I think we'll wind it up there. Thank you very much, Tim.
everyone.
It's been very enlightening and
Good
plenty
questions.
of statistics. And I'm sure it's been a benefit to the audience, and I've certainly enjoyed it. So thanks very much.